Usually, as committee members know, I give you an update on a couple of regulatory issues. A lot of the cases that I discussed last time are being processed even now. So rather than giving you a handout and risk it not having read, I'll just briefly update you orally on it, and then talk a little bit about planning and procurement consultants that the PSC is working with to study our administrative rules on those two subjects. A couple of important regulatory updates. Both Northwestern Energy and MDU plan to file natural gas rate cases this month. Those are the sort of lifeblood of what the PSC does, adjustments in rates reflecting fixed costs and increased operational costs of a utility. When we have a rate case come in, a utility takes its previous test year, discusses all of the operational expenses as well as the rate of return on its rate base, and compares those to the revenues they're earning under current rates. And the effort of the PSC is basically to true those up, making sure that certain things that shouldn't be in rates that the utility is spending money on are excluded. We held at the PSC recently a transmission forum with executives from Bonneville Power Administration, their senior vice president from transmission, and several others came out to Montana, Northwestern Energy, their vice president for transmission, and others, as well as Gay Electric, several of their transmission people, as well as PowerX, which is a major power marketer and customer of the transmission system for both BPA and Northwestern. Two topics were discussed at that roundtable, and I hope to hold more of these informational sessions and roundtables as our time progresses. They were basically the point-to-point transmission upgrade of the Colstrip transmission system, which is co-owned by Northwestern and several of the Colstrip co-owners, as well as the Montana to Washington line, which goes from Townsend on west. And is owned by Bonneville Power Administration. Proposed in that upgrade for both Northwestern and BPA is an expansion of available transmission capacity, which has caused some interest, certainly in Montana. There would be available, if the Colstrip transmission system line were upgraded, about another 500 megawatts of available transmission capacity, which Gay Electric hopes to use as a customer to build their Harleton wind project. That is still very much in flux. Even though a new line is not needed for this upgrade, you can simply install series capacitors and build certain substations in order to squeeze more available transmission capacity out of the existing line. It's nonetheless a project that will take at least 5 years from this point, probably, in order to get anything done. Among the other reasons is the fact that even though probably only about 40 acres of federal land is affected by this project, a NEPA study needs to be done by Bonneville Power Administration, which, as you know, is quite involved. The other topic that was discussed at the transmission forum concerned the integration of wind resources. Obviously, with a native load that usually is 1,100 to 1,200 megawatts for Northwestern, and a balancing area load, including the large commercial customers that are balanced by Northwestern but served energy by PPL and others, maybe about 1,800 megawatts. It's very hard to integrate another 500 megawatts of wind because of the operational challenges with which you're all familiar. So finding ways wind can supply itself with that balancing capability, or dynamically transfer its generation to a balancing area with a larger load that can absorb the balancing task is essential. That was another topic of conversation. I'd encourage you all to look at the slide decks that are available on our homepage, psc.mt.gov. There you can find BPA, Northwestern, Gay Electric's, and PowerX's slide presentations. We also held a workshop, and this segs into what I really would like to talk to you about today, on planning and procurement practices. Basically, the impetus behind this is that the PSC felt that it was time to take a look at our administrative rules regarding planning and procurement. We have two sets of rules, one in subchapter 20, one in subchapter 82 of our title and administrative code. or administrative rules, and one applies to unrestructured utilities and one applies to restructured utilities. And we wanted to see if any changes should or could be made to make those rules better. In general, MDU's business practice has not changed. Sometimes it seems since time immemorial. They do not enjoy the luxury of pre-approval applications to the Montana PSC. They don't ask permission before they build something, and they're largely driven by their integrated resource planning process, which takes together their entire network of customers throughout many different states and puts it together. They only have tens of thousands of customers here in Montana. The bulk of their business is in North Dakota. Northwestern, on the other hand, I think it's safe to say is at a point of departure from its traditional business practice, in as much as it has one in its brief time in the state of Montana. It owns relatively little of its own generation, only 222 megawatts of Colstrip Unit 4. Dave Gates Generating Station in Anaconda, or near Anaconda, which, despite being a generating facility, is not meant to be an energy supply facility. As we've talked about previously, it provides a transmission ancillary service to keep the grid in balance, as well as now soon to be a 40-megawatt wind facility at Spinenkop near Geyser. It also does have some long-term committed contracts with Basin Creek, which is a natural gas peaking plant, Judith Gap, of course, as well as Gordon Butte Wind Farm, a relatively new QF. There's around, as I mentioned before, 1,100 to 1,200 megawatts of demand or load on Northwestern's system that needs to be served. Only about 20% of that is served by Northwestern's owned generation, maybe 30 to 35% if you count owned generation, as well as long-term contracts with other generating stations, which are output specific to those generators. Most utilities in the region have significantly larger holdings, and Northwestern has indicated in its corporate plan, its annual report, and to the PSC as well, that it intends to rebuild its generation portfolio. The legislature, of course, has paved the way for that in HB 25, a significant piece of legislation which the PSC works every day to implement. The potential rules in question are not formal rulemaking at all yet. We've had 2 public workshops, one to scope out issues that might be in play, and another to discuss the issues that were scoped. One of the bad things, of course, about a rulemaking process is that an agency has to come down and say what the rules are to be and then accept comment in a very formal process. We wanted to precede any process like that, given the nature of these rules, with a kind of informal dialogue in advance of any kind of rulemaking. And that's what we've done here. The intermediary product, I guess you could call it, which you have received, is a kind of straw man proposal of rules that were issued as a discussion item at the last panel, as well as a large slide deck that outlines key issues related to planning and procurement processes. Just to outline a few of those key issues, first with regard to planning. Every other year, Northwestern Energy Resources, releases its electricity supply resource procurement plan, which is this. It outlines its existing available resources. It outlines risks that it thinks will be present in the market, like natural gas costs fluctuating, environmental upgrade risks, the cost of complying with EPA rules, the potential availability or unavailability of generation relating to those EPA rules, potential future resources that Northwestern is looking to build. Out of this plan, for instance, comes that benchmark 300 megawatt natural gas combined cycle facility, which has the effect of establishing rates for the small independent generators that are allowed onto Northwestern system. Energy efficiency is studied in the plan, as well as in probably what is the most intensive and opaque issue in the plan is a set of stochastic modeling where a lot of different portfolios of current and planned generation, as well as load resulting from a demand forecast, are fed into a computer model, and the model basically puts out different portfolios, models not only their price, but also the amount of risk those portfolios bear related to fuel cost, environmental concerns, that type of thing. It's not determinative of what Northwestern will do, but in general it results in an action plan that Northwestern is expected to follow, absent an indication that the plan has somehow become outdated or that an opportunity that's unique has presented itself that doesn't exactly fit into the plan. The foundational question that has to be asked about planning of any kind is whether the planning process is robust enough. We do a biennial plan. I think the consultants and myself, as well as Northwestern Energy, feel that we could probably benefit from having another year in the planning cycle to allow a more in-depth study of the process and cut back some of the needless bureaucratic shuffling that goes on inevitably in administrative processes. I think a 3-year process would probably allow more time to do that rather than the current 2-year process we have in place. One of the obvious flaws of planning in the Northwestern case is that transmission is not included in the plan. To be truly an integrated resource plan, you should consider much more in-depth transmission capacity availability, places where transmission is constrained within your system, as well as the ancillary transmission services that are offered in your system. And I think in a noticeable oversight and error in the current plan, we were just talking about the Dave Gates generating station that provides this transmission ancillary service. Northwestern Energy in its own plan misidentifies the amount of this transmission ancillary service available from Dave Gates, in a clear indication that really you should bring together the energy planners and the transmission planners and put together a unified plan that makes sense to both parties. So transmission is not included in the plan. There are questions, I think, about load forecasting and modeling. The committee has dealt extensively and heard of the impacts when load forecasts go bad, when people think that they'll need way more power than they do, when people think they're going to have a lot more customers than they end up having, and people end up planning and making expenditures based on faulty expectations. Northwestern does, I think, a much better job than in the example with which you are aware of planning for that. It's also got a bigger service territory, so if it's wrong about 10 megawatts here or there, perhaps it can be absorbed. It's not as a fraction so large as to topple the entire plan. However, I think there probably is more in-depth forecasting and modeling that can be done to try to forecast particular segments of load growth and particular communities of load growth as well, based on a lot of economic indicators. And then as well, the consultants we've hired believe that in addition to a 3-year plan, there should probably be some kind of annual meeting to get the regulators and the utility and other groups who are interested to sit down and talk about how some of the assumptions and planning might have changed. Look at where economic recovery is in the area. Look at where, if natural gas prices have gone haywire, not a plan within a plan, but simply an update on an annual basis within a 3-year cycle.